What happens when a cocky young sailor thinks he can challenge a decorated Navy commander in front of the entire crew? With all due respect, sir, you clearly don't understand modern naval warfare tactics. The words echoed through the USS Valiant's bridge like a depth charge explosion. Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Torres had just made the biggest mistake of his naval career. He had questioned Commander James Mitchell's expertise in front of 40 seasoned sailors during a critical mission briefing, with lives hanging in the balance. What happened next would become legendary throughout the Pacific Fleet. Commander Mitchell slowly set down his tactical manual, turned to face the arrogant sailor, and delivered a response that would teach Torres why respect and discipline are the backbone of naval tradition. But what nobody on that bridge knew was that Torres had been planning this confrontation for weeks, believing his MIT engineering degree made him superior to what he called old-school Navy leadership. He was about to learn why James Mitchell had earned 3 Navy crosses and the unwavering respect of every sailor who had ever served under him. If you want to see how true naval leadership handles insubordination and transforms arrogance into honor, you're about to witness a masterclass in military authority that will leave you speechless. The morning of November 8th began with storm warnings echoing across the Pacific. The USS Valiant, a guided missile destroyer cutting through 12-foot swells 200 miles west of San Diego, was already experiencing the outer bands of what meteorologists were calling the storm of the decade. Commander James Mitchell had been awake since 300, monitoring weather reports, coordinating with Fleet Command, and preparing his crew for what was shaping up to be one of the most challenging rescue operations in recent Pacific Fleet history. At 52 years old, with 28 years of naval service etched into every line of his weathered face, Mitchell still maintained the sharp instincts and unwavering focus that had made him one of the most respected officers in the modern Navy. His service record read like a textbook of naval excellence. 3 Navy Crosses, 2 Bronze Stars, the Navy Distinguished Service Medal, and a reputation for bringing every sailor under his command home safely, no matter how dangerous the mission. The ship's Combat Information Center buzzed with controlled tension as sailors monitored radar screens, weather data, and communication frequencies. The USS Valiant was no ordinary destroyer. It was one of the Navy's most advanced Arleigh Burke-class ships, equipped with state-of-the-art radar systems, satellite communication arrays, and enough firepower to level a small city. But on this gray November morning, all that technology was focused on a single mission: saving lives. The crisis had begun 18 hours earlier when the MV Pacific Star, a 600-foot commercial cargo vessel, had sent a distress signal while battling engine failure in increasingly hostile seas. The merchant ship carried 23 crew members, American, Filipino, and Mexican sailors who had been hauling agricultural equipment from Los Angeles to Hawaii when their main engines suffered catastrophic failure. Dead in the water and drifting helplessly, the Pacific Star was directly in the path of Hurricane Elena, a Category 3 storm that was intensifying as it moved northwest across the Pacific. With winds already reaching 60 knots and seas building to dangerous 20-foot swells, time was running out for a rescue operation. The nearest Coast Guard assets were committed to evacuating oil platforms and smaller vessels closer to shore, leaving the USS Valiant as the only military vessel capable of reaching the Pacific Star before the storm's full fury arrived. What made this morning different was the presence of Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Torres, a 26-year-old electronics technician who had transferred to the Valiant just 3 months earlier from shore duty in Norfolk, Virginia. Torres was undeniably brilliant. His MIT degree in electrical engineering, his innovative approaches to radar calibration, and his ability to troubleshoot complex electronic systems had impressed many junior officers and earned him rapid advancement through the enlisted ranks. But those who knew Torres from his previous assignments understood that he never did anything without an agenda. He was known throughout the Norfolk Naval Base for his aggressive questioning of standard procedures, his inflated sense of intellectual superiority, and his belief that his civilian education made him more qualified than career naval officers to make tactical and strategic decisions. Torres had earned a reputation as a sailor who could fix any electronic problem but couldn't fix his attitude problem. For 3 weeks since arriving aboard the Valiant, Torres had been telling anyone who would listen in the enlisted mess, the ship's electronics workshop, and even during off-duty conversations that he was going to show these dinosaur commanders how modern naval operations should really work. He had studied Commander Mitchell's service record obsessively, reading every available report from the commander's previous commands, watching recordings of his testimony before Congress about naval readiness, and analyzing his tactical decisions during previous rescue operations. Torres had convinced himself that Mitchell's traditional approach to naval command was fundamentally outdated in an age of satellite communications, computer-guided weapons systems, and artificial intelligence-assisted decision-making. He saw the commander's reliance on experienced petty officers, traditional seamanship, and time-tested naval procedures as evidence of an officer who had failed to adapt to 21st-century military realities. His strategy was calculated and carefully planned. Torres intended to create a high-profile confrontation during a critical situation, demonstrate his technical superiority and modern thinking, and position himself as the voice of progressive naval innovation. He had even prepared several complex technical arguments designed to confuse and embarrass Commander Mitchell in front of the crew, hoping to undermine the commander's authority and establish himself as an emerging leader aboard the ship. What Torres didn't know was that Commander James Mitchell had been commanding ships and leading sailors since before Torres had learned to drive a car. He didn't know that Mitchell had successfully completed over 300 search and rescue operations in his career, from hurricane evacuations in the Gulf of Mexico to combat rescues in the Persian Gulf. He didn't know that Mitchell had earned a master's degree in naval engineering from the Naval Postgraduate School while simultaneously commanding a frigate in the Arabian Sea. And Torres certainly didn't know that beneath the commander's calm, grandfatherly demeanor and measured speaking style lay one of the most tactically brilliant and strategically sophisticated minds in the modern United States Navy. The emergency briefing was called for 0800 in the ship's main briefing room, a sterile but functional space dominated by large screen displays showing weather data, tactical charts, and satellite imagery. The assembled crew included department heads, senior petty officers, division leaders, and key technical specialists whose expertise would be crucial for the rescue operation. Torres, whose knowledge of the ship's advanced radar and communication systems made his presence essential, sat in the back row with other electronics technicians, his tablet loaded with weather analysis software and technical manuals. As the briefing began, Commander Mitchell approached the podium with the confident bearing of an officer who had delivered thousands of similar briefings over nearly 3 decades of naval service. His voice carried the authority of experience as he outlined the situation with characteristic precision and clarity. Gentlemen and ladies, we have a merchant vessel in distress approximately 42 nautical miles northeast of our current position. The MV Pacific Star is dead in the water with complete engine failure, carrying 23 souls who are depending on us for their lives. Hurricane Elena is intensifying rapidly and will reach the vessel's position within 5 to 6 hours, depending on the storm's forward speed. The commander moved to the tactical display, his laser pointer highlighting critical data points on weather maps and rescue coordinates. Current conditions show winds at 60 knots, gusting to 75, with seas building steadily toward 25 feet. Wave intervals are decreasing, which means we're looking at increasingly chaotic sea states that will make small boat operations extremely hazardous. He paused, making eye contact with senior enlisted personnel who would be leading the actual rescue teams. Our window for safe rescue operations is closing rapidly. We'll need to launch both RHIBs simultaneously, with Rescue Team Alpha approaching from the lee side, while Team Bravo provides backup support and medical assistance. The operation will require precise timing, flawless coordination, and the kind of seamanship that has defined the United States Navy for over 2 centuries. Senior Chief Petty Officer Williams, the ship's most experienced boatswain's mate and a veteran of 30 years of naval service, raised his hand. His weathered face showed the kind of concern that comes from decades of watching the ocean's power. "Commander, with those sea conditions deteriorating as rapidly as they are, shouldn't we consider waiting for Coast Guard backup from San Diego or requesting helicopter support from Naval Air Station North Island?" Mitchell nodded, acknowledging the valid concern from one of his most trusted senior enlisted advisors. "Senior Chief, Coast Guard assets are currently committed to evacuating oil platforms and smaller recreational vessels closer to shore. Every available helicopter is engaged in rescue operations from Ventura to San Diego. We're the only naval vessel in range capable of reaching the Pacific Star before the storm's full impact." He gestured to the weather display, where Hurricane Elena's spiral bands showed the storm's relentless approach toward the disabled merchant vessel. "Every hour we wait increases the risk exponentially. Sea conditions will become impossible for small boat operations, and the Pacific Star's crew will be facing waves that could break over their deck and potentially sink the vessel." Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, the ship's operations officer and a 15-year Navy veteran with extensive experience in search and rescue coordination, stood to present additional details. "Commander, I've been coordinating with the Pacific Star's captain via radio. Their emergency generator is still functioning, but they're taking on water in the engine room. They estimate they have perhaps 8 to 10 hours before the flooding becomes critical." "Thank you, Sarah. That confirms our timeline." Mitchell turned back to the assembled crew. "We'll be conducting this operation using proven methods that have saved thousands of lives over the decades. Our RHIBs are equipped with the most advanced safety equipment available. Our crews are trained to Navy standards that exceed those of any other maritime service in the world, and we have the experience necessary to execute this mission successfully." Torres had been listening with growing frustration and what he considered professional disappointment. The rescue plan seemed straightforward but unimaginative to his engineer's mind. Where were the technological solutions? Why weren't they using advanced satellite tracking for optimal approach vectors? Why rely on traditional seamanship when computer modeling could provide superior tactical options that minimized risk and maximized efficiency? Torres looked at his tablet, which displayed sophisticated weather analysis software, satellite imagery with real-time updates, and navigation programs that could calculate optimal routes with mathematical precision. He had spent hours developing what he considered a superior rescue approach, one that leveraged 21st-century technology instead of relying on methods that hadn't fundamentally changed since World War II. "Commander," Torres said, his voice carrying a tone of barely concealed condescension that made several senior enlisted personnel exchange concerned glances. "With respect, sir, this rescue approach seems unnecessarily dangerous and tactically unsound given the technological resources available to us." The briefing room fell silent with the kind of sudden quiet that occurs when someone commits a serious breach of military protocol. "In the Navy, you didn't interrupt a commanding officer during an operational briefing unless lives were in immediate danger, and you certainly didn't question the tactical competence of a commander with Mitchell's reputation and experience." Mitchell looked up from the charts, his expression remaining professionally neutral, but his eyes showing the alert focus of an officer who had just detected a potential problem. "Explain your concern, Petty Officer Torres." Torres stood, pulling out his tablet and activating the presentation software he had prepared. "Sir, I've conducted extensive computer analysis on optimal rescue approaches using current weather patterns, wind vector calculations, sea state modeling, and satellite-assisted navigation data. The traditional small boat deployment method has a 67% probability of equipment failure or personnel injury under these specific conditions." Several veteran sailors in the room shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Computer simulations were useful tools for planning and analysis, but experienced sailors knew they couldn't replicate the reality of salt spray, rolling decks, equipment failures, and the split-second decisions required in actual rescue operations where lives hung in the balance. "Continue, Torres," Mitchell said calmly, though those who knew him well could detect a slight edge in his voice. Torres gained confidence from what he mistakenly interpreted as the commander's uncertainty or willingness to consider alternative approaches. He activated his tablet's display, projecting weather data and navigational charts onto the briefing room's main screen. "Sir, satellite imagery analysis shows we could approach from the northwest quadrant, using the storm's wind pattern to our tactical advantage rather than fighting against it. If we deploy our SH-60 Seahawk helicopter with precision GPS coordinates and computer-calculated approach vectors, we could extract the entire crew in 2 lifts, completely eliminating the risk of small boat operations in heavy seas." Lieutenant Commander Chen, who had coordinated dozens of helicopter rescues during her career, spoke up with the patient tone of an officer explaining basic flight safety to a sailor who clearly didn't understand aviation limitations. "Torres, our helicopter cannot safely operate in 60-knot winds with gusts exceeding 75 knots. That's fundamental flight safety doctrine." Torres waved dismissively, his gesture showing the kind of arrogance that senior officers had learned to recognize as dangerous. "Ma'am, with respect, that's outdated thinking based on conservative safety protocols." The SH-60 Seahawk's technical specifications clearly indicate operational capability up to 70 knots with proper wind compensation algorithms and computer-assisted flight controls. We're artificially limiting ourselves with safety margins that were established for earlier generation aircraft. The tension in the briefing room became palpable as Torres had just dismissed the professional judgment of both his commanding officer and the operations officer while demonstrating a fundamental misunderstanding of helicopter operations in severe weather. Several senior chiefs looked at each other with expressions that ranged from disbelief to anger at the young sailor's disrespectful tone. But Torres wasn't finished with his presentation. His confidence was building as he warmed to his prepared arguments. "Furthermore, Commander," Torres continued, his voice now carrying the unmistakable tone of condescension that had made him unpopular with experienced sailors throughout his naval career, "satellite coordination and computer-assisted rescue operations have fundamentally superseded traditional seamanship methods in modern naval operations. The tactical approach you're proposing relies on intuition and experience rather than data-driven decision-making." He gestured toward his tablet display, which showed computer-generated rescue scenarios with mathematical precision. "With all due respect, sir, you clearly don't understand modern naval warfare tactics and rescue methodologies. Satellite coordination, computer-assisted navigation, and algorithmic weather analysis have revolutionized maritime rescue operations. Perhaps if you had studied contemporary naval technology and strategic thinking instead of relying on 20th century approaches, you might better grasp these tactical advantages." The briefing room fell completely silent, except for the barely audible hum of the ship's ventilation system. Even the most junior sailors in the room understood that Torres had just crossed a line that should never be crossed. He had insulted Commander Mitchell's competence in front of the entire senior staff, questioned his understanding of modern naval operations, implied that his decades of experience were worthless compared to computer simulations, and suggested that the commander was professionally inadequate due to his reliance on traditional naval methods. Nobody challenged James Mitchell's tactical expertise in his own briefing room and walked away with their career intact. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only 10 seconds. Every person in the room could feel the atmosphere change as Commander Mitchell slowly closed the tactical manual he had been referencing, set it down on the briefing table with deliberate precision, and looked directly at Torres with the kind of steady gaze that had intimidated admirals and enlisted sailors alike throughout his distinguished career. His expression remained professionally neutral and controlled, but everyone in the room could sense the temperature drop as Mitchell's eyes fixed on the young sailor who had just made the biggest mistake of his naval career. Petty Officer Torres, Mitchell said in that calm, measured tone that every sailor in the Pacific Fleet had learned to respect and fear in equal measure. I want to make absolutely certain I understand your position correctly. Are you telling me that in your expert opinion, based on your 3 months of service aboard this vessel, I am unqualified to command this rescue operation? Torres, emboldened by what he completely misread as uncertainty rather than controlled anger, doubled down on his criticism with the kind of arrogance that comes from confusing intelligence with wisdom. Commander, I'm simply stating that complex maritime rescue operations in severe weather conditions require sophisticated understanding of meteorological data analysis, satellite-guided tactical coordination, and computer-assisted decision-making, technical competencies that might be beyond the scope of traditional naval training programs. Mitchell nodded slowly, his face giving away nothing of his thoughts, while every experienced sailor in the room recognized the dangerous calm that preceded a professional storm. I see. Mr. Torres, before we proceed with your sophisticated recommendations and computer-generated rescue scenarios, I'd like to ask you a few basic questions about this rescue operation that your analysis seems to have overlooked. He moved to the tactical display, highlighting weather data that Torres had claimed to analyze comprehensively. You mentioned optimal approach vectors using satellite tracking and GPS-guided precision operations. Have you reviewed the current GPS satellite constellation and signal strength over our specific operational area? Torres hesitated for the first time since beginning his presentation. He had run sophisticated computer simulations using standard GPS assumptions, but he hadn't checked the actual satellite coverage and signal quality in real time for their specific coordinates in the middle of the Pacific Ocean during a major storm. Commander, satellite coverage in this region should be optimal according to standard navigation charts. That's not what I asked, Petty Officer. Have you checked the current GPS satellite constellation, signal strength, and atmospheric interference for our specific coordinates during current weather conditions? Torres felt the first crack in his confidence, as he realized his analysis might have fundamental gaps. No, sir, but standard satellite coverage indicates— Mr. Torres, Mitchell interrupted, his voice still calm but with an edge that made everyone in the room lean forward and pay closer attention. You're recommending satellite-guided precision operations in the middle of the Pacific Ocean during a major hurricane with wind speeds that create significant atmospheric disturbance. Let me ask you again. Have you verified current satellite coverage, signal degradation due to ionospheric interference, and the reliability of GPS systems under these specific weather conditions? The arrogance began to fade from Torres's face as he realized he might have made assumptions that weren't supported by actual data. No, Commander, but I assumed that modern GPS systems would compensate for— Assumptions kill sailors, Torres. Let me show you something that apparently wasn't included in your sophisticated analysis. Mitchell pulled up real-time satellite data on the briefing room's main display, accessing information that required command-level security clearance and operational experience that Torres didn't possess. Current GPS signal strength in our operational area is degraded by 43% due to ionospheric disturbance caused by the hurricane's electromagnetic effects. Satellite-guided precision operations would have a margin of error exceeding 2 nautical miles under current conditions. Is a 2-mile margin of error acceptable for a rescue operation where we need to position boats within 50 feet of a disabled vessel, Petty Officer Torres? Torres's confident posture began to crumble as he realized his fundamental analysis was based on peacetime conditions rather than the harsh reality of conducting operations during a major storm. Sir, I didn't realize the atmospheric interference would be so significant. You didn't realize, Mitchell repeated with the kind of quiet emphasis that made the words sound like an indictment. Now, you also recommended helicopter operations in 70-knot winds with gusts exceeding 75 knots. Have you reviewed the specific operational limitations for the SH-60 Seahawk under our current sea state conditions, or did you simply read the basic technical specifications? Torres felt his presentation falling apart as he realized how many critical factors he had failed to consider. Commander, the technical specifications clearly state maximum wind tolerances, and I assumed— Answer the question, Torres. Have you reviewed operational limitations for helicopter operations with 20-foot seas, crosswind gusts exceeding 75 knots, and the specific challenges of conducting rescue operations from a vessel that's rolling 30 degrees in heavy swells? The silence stretched as Torres realized he had no adequate answer. He hadn't considered the complex interactions between wind, sea state, and aircraft performance that every naval aviator learned during their first year of flight training. No, sir. Mitchell pulled out a thick manual, the Naval Air Operations Handbook that every sailor working with helicopters was required to study and understand. SH-60 Operational Limitations, Chapter 4, Section 2.3. Operations in sea states exceeding Force 7 with sustained winds above 55 knots require special authorization and are strictly prohibited without exceptional circumstances, justification, and crew certification for extreme weather operations. He looked up at Torres, whose confident expression had completely disappeared and been replaced by growing concern and embarrassment. Our helicopter crew, while highly skilled and experienced, is not certified for extreme weather rescue operations in hurricane conditions. The closest certified crew for operations in these conditions is stationed at Pearl Harbor, approximately 8 hours away. Were you planning to pilot the helicopter yourself during this rescue, Torres? The briefing room was so quiet that the ship's engines and the sound of waves against the hull seemed unnaturally loud. Torres's face had transitioned from confident to concerned to genuinely worried as he realized how many fundamental errors his analysis contained. But Commander Mitchell wasn't finished. What he said next would not only systematically destroy Torres's arrogance, but provide everyone watching with a comprehensive lesson about preparation, respect, operational competence, and the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom earned through decades of naval service. Furthermore, Torres, Mitchell continued, his voice gaining authority and strength with each point, you suggested that my traditional naval training was inadequate for modern rescue operations and that I don't understand contemporary naval tactics. I'm curious about your operational experience and background. How many search and rescue operations have you personally participated in during your naval career? Torres looked confused and increasingly uncomfortable as he realized the direction of Mitchell's questioning. Commander, I don't see the relevance of operational experience when we have computer modeling that can— The relevance, Petty Officer, is competence under actual operational conditions rather than theoretical scenarios. How many search and rescue operations have you participated in? The silence stretched as Torres was forced to confront the limitations of his experience. He had never participated in an actual rescue operation. All his knowledge came from computer simulations, technical manuals, and theoretical studies conducted in controlled classroom environments. None, sir. None. And how many times have you operated rigid-hull inflatable boats in heavy weather conditions, with seas exceeding 15 feet? Torres felt his confidence evaporating as each question revealed another gap in his practical experience. Sir, I've completed all the required training courses and qualifications. That's not what I asked, Torres. How many times have you actually operated small boats in severe weather conditions? Torres's face reddened with embarrassment as he was forced to admit the truth. Never, sir. I see. And how many times have you commanded personnel under emergency conditions where lives were at stake and split-second decisions determined success or failure? The answer was obvious to everyone in the room, but Torres was forced to voice his inexperience. Never, sir. So let me understand this correctly, Torres. Mitchell's voice remained calm and controlled, but each word carried the weight of professional judgment. You have never participated in a rescue operation, never operated boats in heavy weather, never commanded personnel under emergency conditions, never dealt with the life and death realities of maritime rescue, but you believe you're qualified to redesign my rescue plan based on computer simulations and theoretical knowledge gained from classroom study. Torres tried to speak, but Mitchell held up his hand with the unmistakable authority of a commanding officer who wasn't finished making his point. I'm not finished, petty officer. You also stated that I don't understand modern naval warfare tactics, and that my education and experience are inadequate for contemporary naval operations. I'm curious. Have you actually researched my service record and qualifications, or did you make assumptions based on my age and your perception of traditional naval methods? Torres felt a sinking sensation as he realized he had made another critical error. Sir, I researched your background, but I may not have reviewed all the details. Then let me educate you about the officer you just attempted to embarrass in front of his crew. Mitchell opened his service record file, a document that contained nearly 3 decades of naval achievement. I commanded USS Mackenzie during Hurricane Katrina rescue operations, where my crew and I saved over 300 civilians from flooding in New Orleans. I led the multinational task force that rescued the crew of MV Stellar Dawn during a 4-day storm in the Arabian Sea. I commanded the rescue operation that saved 47 sailors from USS Porter after it suffered engineering casualties during a typhoon in the Western Pacific. Each accomplishment hit Torres like a physical blow as he realized the depth of his misjudgment. Mitchell continued with the methodical precision of an officer who had earned every credential through operational experience. I have completed the Advanced Naval Warfare College program with distinction, graduated from the Joint Maritime Operations course at the Naval War College, and I hold current certifications in modern naval tactical systems, satellite communications, computer-assisted navigation, and advanced meteorological analysis, most of which didn't exist when I was a junior officer, but which I learned because continuous education is essential for effective naval leadership. Mitchell turned to address the entire briefing room, ensuring that every sailor present understood the lesson being taught. In 28 years of naval service, I have participated in 197 successful rescue operations in conditions ranging from calm seas to Category 4 hurricanes. I have commanded vessels in sea states exceeding Force 9, where waves reached heights of 40 feet and winds exceeded 90 knots. I have tactical certifications in satellite navigation, computer-assisted operations, advanced radar systems, and meteorological analysis that I earned while simultaneously commanding ships and leading sailors in combat and rescue operations. He looked directly at Torres, whose earlier arrogance had been completely replaced by shame and growing understanding of his mistakes. I also have an advanced degree in naval engineering from the Naval Postgraduate School, which I earned through distance learning while commanding a frigate during deployment, studying navigation, ship design, weather analysis, and the same computer modeling techniques you believe I don't understand. Mitchell paused, allowing the full weight of his qualifications to sink in before delivering his final point. Tell me, Torres, exactly what qualifications do you have that make you more competent to plan this rescue operation than I am? The question hung in the air like a live torpedo. Torres had absolutely no answer that wouldn't make him look even more foolish and arrogant. His MIT degree in computer simulations seemed pathetically inadequate compared to Mitchell's decades of actual operational experience, advanced military education, and proven track record of saving lives under the most challenging conditions imaginable. Now, Mitchell continued, his voice taking on the tone of a professor delivering a crucial lesson, you suggested that satellite-guided operations and computer-assisted rescue methods are superior to traditional seamanship and that I don't understand modern tactical approaches. Are you familiar with the rescue of MV Eastern Promise last year? Torres shook his head weakly, realizing he was about to learn about another example of his incomplete knowledge. a cargo vessel similar to Pacific Star, disabled during a storm off the Aleutian Islands. The Coast Guard initially attempted a satellite-guided helicopter rescue, exactly the approach you recommended. Mitchell's voice carried the weight of tragedy as he continued. 2 helicopters crashed due to GPS navigation errors caused by atmospheric interference and ground proximity warnings confused by large wave heights. 14 additional lives were lost when the rescue aircraft went down. Torres felt physically sick as he realized his recommended approach was identical to a failed rescue attempt that had resulted in multiple fatalities. The computer simulations he had relied on hadn't accounted for the complex realities that had caused the Eastern Promise disaster. The vessel was ultimately rescued by USS Constellation using traditional seamanship, small boat operations, weather reading skills, and crew experience developed through decades of training and operational deployment. Exactly the approach you criticized as outdated and dangerous. All 26 remaining crew members were saved because experienced sailors used proven methods that have been refined through generations of naval service. Mitchell closed the file and looked at Torres with the disappointed expression of a career officer who had seen too many young sailors confuse intelligence with wisdom, education with experience, and theoretical knowledge with practical competence. Torres, you clearly have a brilliant technical mind. Your innovations with our radar systems have impressed everyone aboard this ship, and your ability to troubleshoot complex electronic problems has been valuable to our mission readiness. But brilliance without experience is dangerous in naval operations. Knowledge without respect for those who came before you and learned these lessons through trial, error, and sometimes tragedy is nothing more than arrogance that can get people killed. The young sailor stood frozen, his earlier confidence completely shattered and replaced by the dawning realization that he had not only embarrassed himself, but had potentially undermined a crucial rescue operation with his unprofessional conduct. What happened next would become legendary throughout the Pacific Fleet and would demonstrate why Commander Mitchell was considered one of the finest leaders in the modern Navy, an officer who could transform a moment of insubordination into a powerful teaching opportunity that would benefit not just Torres, but every sailor who witnessed the exchange. Mr. Torres, Mitchell said, opening the rescue operation file again with deliberate precision. I'm going to do something now that might surprise you and will certainly teach you more about naval leadership than any computer simulation or classroom lecture ever could. Torres looked up hopefully, though his face still showed the shame and embarrassment of his public humiliation. Despite your unprofessional conduct, your dangerous overconfidence, and your disrespectful attitude toward the experience and wisdom of your fellow sailors, I'm going to give you an opportunity to learn what real naval operations look like and why we use the methods that have saved thousands of lives over the decades. Mitchell's voice carried the authority of a commander who had made life-and-death decisions in conditions that would test any sailor's courage and competence. You're going to participate in this rescue operation as a full member of Rescue Team Alpha. You'll be operating a rigid-hull inflatable boat in 25-foot seas with winds gusting to 80 knots. You'll experience firsthand why we rely on traditional seamanship, human judgment, and the accumulated wisdom of generations of sailors instead of depending solely on computer simulations and satellite guidance. Torres's face went pale as he realized what Mitchell was telling him. Operating a RHIB in storm conditions was one of the most dangerous assignments in naval operations, requiring physical strength, mental toughness, and the kind of practical seamanship skills that could only be developed through extensive training and experience. Furthermore, Mitchell continued, his voice gaining intensity, you'll be responsible for all electronic navigation and communication systems during the rescue operation. When satellite guidance fails, and it will fail under these conditions, you'll need to rely on traditional navigation methods, compass bearings, and the kind of seamanship skills that you apparently believe are obsolete. The commander's tone remained steady and professional, but there was unmistakable steel underneath his words. Senior Chief Williams will be your boat commander. He has 30 years of seamanship experience, has participated in more rescue operations than you've had hot meals, and has saved more lives than you can count. You will follow his orders without question, learn from his expertise, and demonstrate the respect for experience and wisdom that you've failed to show during this briefing. Torres nodded quickly, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by nervous apprehension about the dangerous mission he had just been assigned. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I'm not finished, Torres. Mitchell's voice carried the unmistakable authority of an officer who had commanded respect across multiple decades of distinguished service. If you demonstrate the same arrogance during this operation that you've shown in this briefing room, if you endanger lives with reckless overconfidence, if you question Senior Chief Williams's judgment based on your computer simulations, or if you show disrespect to any member of the rescue team, you'll find yourself transferred to the most remote weather monitoring station the Navy operates, spending the remainder of your enlistment tracking seagull migration patterns and measuring rainfall. In the Aleutian Islands, the threat was delivered with the calm authority of an officer who had commanded respect from admirals and enlisted sailors alike throughout his career. Mitchell's reputation for fairness was matched only by his reputation for decisive action when sailors endangered their shipmates through arrogance or incompetence. Do I make myself perfectly clear, Petty Officer Torres? Perfectly clear, Commander. Mitchell looked out at the assembled senior staff, at the experienced petty officers and chiefs who would risk their lives to save strangers in a storm, at the junior sailors who were learning what naval leadership looked like when tested by crisis and challenged by insubordination. Let this be a lesson to everyone in this room and everyone who serves aboard this ship, he said, his voice carrying the authority of hard-earned wisdom and the weight of responsibility for every life under his command. Naval operations are not about individual brilliance, technological superiority, or academic credentials. They're about teamwork, mutual respect, and the accumulated wisdom that has been paid for with the lives of sailors who came before us and faced challenges we can barely imagine. He looked back at Torres, whose posture now showed proper military bearing and genuine humility. In the United States Navy, we don't care if you graduated from MIT or learned navigation from your grandfather in a fishing boat. We care about competence under pressure, respect for your shipmates, and the humility to learn from those who have earned their knowledge through experience, sacrifice, and dedication to something greater than their own ambitions. Mitchell picked up his tactical manual with finality. Mr. Torres, you have 4 hours to prepare for this rescue operation. Study traditional navigation methods, learn weather reading techniques from Senior Chief Williams, and remember that the lives of 23 civilians depend on our competence, our teamwork, and our commitment to the finest traditions of naval service, not on our egos or our computer simulations. He closed the manual with authority that resonated throughout the briefing room. All department heads, prepare your teams for rescue operations. We launch at 1200 hours. Dismissed. As the briefing room emptied, Torres stood alone at the tactical display, staring at the storm data he had so confidently analyzed just minutes earlier. The arrogance that had carried him through MIT, through Navy technical schools, through his rapid advancement to Petty Officer Second Class, had been systematically dismantled by a commander who had never raised his voice, never lost his professional composure, and never resorted to personal attacks or humiliation. Senior Chief Petty Officer Williams approached Torres as he gathered his tablet and notes with shaking hands. The weathered boatswain's mate had seen hundreds of young sailors learn hard lessons about naval service, but he had rarely witnessed such a complete transformation of attitude in such a short time. Son, Williams said quietly, his voice carrying the wisdom of 3 decades of naval service. A word of advice from someone who's been where you're going. Commander Mitchell is the finest officer I've served under in 30 years of naval service. He just gave you the opportunity to learn something that can't be taught in any school, any computer simulation, or any classroom, what it really means to be a sailor in the United States Navy. Torres looked up at the senior chief, his eyes showing a mixture of shame, fear, and growing respect for the men he had so carelessly insulted. Senior Chief, how did he know all that? The satellite coverage degradation, the helicopter limitations, the specific rescue precedents, the weather analysis? I spent weeks preparing my analysis. Williams smiled with the patience of a man who had mentored countless young sailors. Because he's done this before, son. More times than you can imagine and in conditions that would test any sailor's courage. Commander Mitchell reads every weather report, studies every technical manual, learns from every operation, and never stops preparing for the next challenge. The senior chief gestured toward the bridge, where Mitchell was already coordinating with other Navy vessels and updating fleet command on the rescue operation. You thought you could embarrass him with computer simulations and technical specifications? Son, he's been using computers to save lives since before you were born, but he also understands their limitations because he's seen what happens when technology fails, and sailors have to rely on seamanship, experience, and the courage to do what's right regardless of what the machines tell them. As Torres walked toward his quarters to prepare for the rescue mission, other crew members watched him with a mixture of pity, curiosity, and professional interest. Word of his public humiliation had spread throughout the ship within minutes, carried by the efficient communication network that exists among sailors who share the confined space of a naval vessel. The ship's internal communication system had recorded the briefing for training purposes, and already junior officers were discussing Mitchell's masterful handling of insubordination as an example of professional leadership under pressure. But the real impact of Torres's confrontation with Commander Mitchell was felt throughout the Pacific Fleet and beyond. Within hours, the video recording of the exchange would be transmitted to naval training facilities as an example of proper leadership response to challenges of authority. Young officers at the Naval Academy would study Mitchell's methodical dismantling of Torres's arguments as a masterclass in maintaining command authority while providing educational opportunities for professional growth. The transformation that Torres was about to undergo would become the subject of case studies in military leadership courses, demonstrating how great commanders can turn moments of crisis into opportunities for developing better sailors and stronger military units. 4 hours later, as Hurricane Elena's winds reached 75 knots and seas built to 28 feet with chaotic wave intervals that made navigation extremely dangerous, Torres found himself suiting up in survival gear for his first real rescue operation. The reality of what he was about to face hit him as he struggled into the heavy-duty flotation vest, waterproof communication gear, and safety harnesses that would keep him connected to the RHIB during the violent ride to the Pacific Star. The ship's boat deck was a scene of controlled chaos as experienced sailors prepared the rigid-hull inflatable boats for launch. These weren't the clean, organized training exercises that Torres had participated in during calm weather. This was the real thing, with equipment checks performed by sailors whose lives would depend on every piece of gear functioning perfectly under extreme conditions. Senior Chief Williams approached Torres, who was checking his navigation equipment with the kind of nervous intensity that comes from knowing you're about to be tested beyond anything you've previously experienced. The senior chief's weathered face showed the calm confidence of a sailor who had conducted dozens of rescues in conditions ranging from moderate seas to full hurricanes. Torres, listen carefully because I'm only going to explain this once, and your life and the lives of your shipmates depend on you understanding what I'm about to tell you. Williams's voice carried the authority of 3 decades of successful operations in some of the most dangerous waters on Earth. When we launch that boat, every computer simulation you've ever run becomes worthless. The ocean doesn't care about your algorithms, your weather models, or your satellite coordinates. It's going to try to kill us with every wave, every gust of wind, and every moment we're in the water. Torres nodded. his earlier arrogance completely replaced by the focused attention of a sailor who was beginning to understand the magnitude of what lay ahead. Williams continued with the patient tone of a teacher whose lessons could mean the difference between life and death. Your job is to maintain communication with the ship, monitor our position using whatever navigation aids are available, and follow my orders without question or delay. When I tell you to hold on, you grab something and hold on like your life depends on it, because it does. When I tell you to prepare for impact, you brace yourself for waves that will hit us like a freight train. And when I tell you to do something, you do it immediately, without thinking, without analyzing, and without trying to improve on my instructions. The senior chief checked Torres's safety harness and communication equipment with the methodical thoroughness of a man who had learned that attention to detail was the difference between successful rescues and maritime disasters. The men on that cargo ship are depending on us to reach them before the storm gets worse. They don't care about your computer models or your theoretical knowledge. They care about whether we have the skill, experience, and courage to get them off that vessel and bring them home to their families. As the RHIB crews made final preparations, Commander Mitchell appeared on the boat deck to personally inspect the rescue teams and provide final instructions. His presence had a calming effect on the assembled sailors, who drew confidence from his decades of experience and his reputation for bringing everyone home safely. "Senior Chief Williams, report on crew readiness," Mitchell said, his voice carrying easily over the wind and the sound of waves breaking against the ship's hull. "Sir, both teams are prepared for launch. Weather conditions are at the upper limit of safe operations, but within acceptable parameters for emergency rescue. Estimated time to target is 45 minutes under current sea conditions." Mitchell nodded, then turned to address the entire rescue team. "Gentlemen, you're about to undertake one of the most challenging operations in naval service. The men aboard the Pacific Star are counting on your skill, your courage, and your commitment to the finest traditions of the United States Navy." He made eye contact with each sailor, including Torres, who felt the weight of the commander's expectations and the responsibility of proving himself worthy of the trust being placed in him. Remember that seamanship, teamwork, and sound judgment have saved more lives than any technology ever invented. Trust your training, trust your shipmates, and trust the experience of the senior petty officers who will lead you through this operation. The commander's final words carried the authority of a leader who had faced similar challenges countless times. Bring those sailors home, and bring yourselves home safely. The Navy doesn't leave anyone behind, and we don't fail when lives are on the line. As the RHIBs were lowered into the churning seas, Torres experienced his first real understanding of what naval operations meant when stripped of classroom theory and computer simulations. The moment the boat hit the water, it began a violent dance with waves that seemed determined to capsize the small craft and send its crew into the Pacific's cold embrace. Senior Chief Williams took control of the boat with the kind of instinctive skill that comes from decades of reading seas, understanding weather patterns, and working with boats that become extensions of the sailors who operate them. His commands were sharp, immediate, and delivered with the authority of a man who had navigated through countless storms and brought his crews home safely. "Torres, check our position and establish communication with the ship," Williams shouted over the roar of wind and engines. Torres fumbled with his navigation equipment, discovering immediately that the GPS signal was indeed degraded, exactly as Commander Mitchell had predicted. The satellite coordinates jumped erratically, sometimes showing their position as being miles from their actual location. For the first time in his naval career, Torres was forced to rely on traditional navigation methods. Compass bearings, radio direction finding, and visual navigation techniques that Senior Chief Williams had mastered through years of practical experience. "Senior Chief, GPS is unreliable. Signal strength is fluctuating between 30 and 50%, Torres called out, his voice showing the strain of trying to communicate while being bounced around by waves that seemed intent on throwing him from the boat. "Roger that. Switch to backup navigation. Use compass bearings to the target and radio triangulation from the ship, Williams responded, his voice calm despite the challenging conditions. For the next 30 minutes, Torres received a crash course in the reality of naval operations that no computer simulation could replicate. Every wave that crashed over the RHIB's bow taught him something new about the ocean's power and unpredictability. Every course correction that Senior Chief Williams made based on wind patterns, wave action, and instinctive seamanship demonstrated the value of experience that could only be gained through years of actual operations. The rigid hull inflatable boat pitched and rolled through swells that reached 28 feet from trough to crest, with the kind of chaotic wave patterns that made navigation as much art as science. Torres found himself holding on for his life while simultaneously trying to maintain communication with the USS Valiant and monitor their approach to the disabled cargo vessel. "Target vessel in sight," Williams called out as the Pacific Star appeared through the spray and storm debris. What Torres saw ahead of them was a sobering reminder of why rescue operations in heavy weather were so dangerous. The 600-foot cargo ship was rolling heavily in the massive swells, its deck alternately rising 40 feet above the water and disappearing into wave troughs that made it look like a toy being played with by an angry giant. The ship's crew could be seen gathered on the deck, wearing bright orange survival suits and clearly visible life preservers. Even from a distance, their desperation and fear were apparent as they watched the small Navy boat approach through conditions that would challenge even the most experienced mariners. "Torres, prepare for a alongside approach. We're going to have one chance to get these people off that ship before conditions become impossible," Williams commanded. As they maneuvered closer to the Pacific Star, Torres began to understand why Commander Mitchell had insisted on using traditional boat operations instead of helicopter rescue. The cargo ship's superstructure was rolling through arcs that would make helicopter operations not just dangerous, but suicidal. Power lines, cargo cranes, and deck equipment created obstacles that would have made aerial rescue impossible even in calm weather. The approach to the cargo ship required seamanship skills that Torres had never fully appreciated. Senior Chief Williams had to time their approach to match the Pacific Star's role, coordinate with the merchant vessel's crew for optimal positioning, and manage the RHIB's position in seas that could crush the small boat against the larger ship's hull if the timing was wrong by even a few seconds. "Stand by for personnel transfer," Williams shouted as they came alongside the cargo ship's accommodation ladder. What followed was 45 minutes of the most intense, dangerous, and rewarding work that Torres had ever experienced. One by one, the Pacific Star's crew members were transferred to the RHIB using techniques that combined modern safety equipment with seamanship methods that had been refined through generations of sailors who had faced similar challenges. Torres's role in the operation was crucial but humbling. His electronic communication equipment maintained contact with the USS Valiant, coordinating the rescue with the ship's medical team and providing updates on weather conditions. But he quickly learned that the most important navigation and communication tools were Senior Chief Williams's eyes, experience, and instinctive understanding of how boats behaved in heavy seas. Every rescue required split-second timing, with Williams reading the wave patterns and timing each approach to minimize the risk to both the rescue boat crew and the merchant sailors being transferred. Torres watched in amazement as the senior chief made decisions based on factors that no computer could calculate: the feel of the boat in the water, the pattern of wave sets, the wind's effect on their maneuverability. "Last man aboard, secure for departure," Williams called out as the final member of the Pacific Star's crew was safely transferred to the RHIB. The return trip to the USS Valiant was even more challenging than the approach, with 23 additional people crowded into a boat designed for a much smaller crew. The rescued sailors, exhausted and traumatized by their ordeal, depended completely on the Navy crew's skill and experience to get them to safety. Torres found himself serving as both navigator and communications operator while also helping to care for merchant sailors who were suffering from exposure, seasickness, and the psychological effects of being rescued from a life-threatening situation. For the first time in his naval career, he understood that rescue operations were about much more than technical competence. They required compassion, leadership, and the kind of personal courage that transforms individual sailors into a team capable of achieving the impossible. As the USS Valiant came into sight through the storm, Torres felt a surge of pride and accomplishment that was entirely different from the intellectual satisfaction he had derived from solving technical problems or completing computer simulations. This was the pride that comes from serving something greater than yourself, from using your skills to save lives, and from proving yourself worthy of the trust placed in you by your shipmates and your country. The recovery of the RHIB by the ship's crane required the same level of skill and teamwork that had characterized the entire rescue operation. Senior Chief Williams coordinated with the ship's deck crew to time the recovery with the ship's roll and the sea conditions, while Torres maintained communication with the bridge and monitored the safety of the rescued sailors. When the boat was finally secured on deck and the rescued crew members were transferred to the ship's medical facility, Torres stood on the rain-soaked deck with a profound new understanding of what naval service really meant. The computer simulations and technical manuals that had once seemed so important now appeared trivial compared to the reality of saving lives through teamwork, experience, and courage. Commander Mitchell was waiting on the boat deck as the rescue teams secured their equipment and began post-operation procedures. He approached Torres, who stood at attention despite his exhaustion, soaked uniform, and the emotional impact of his first real rescue operation. "Petty Officer Torres, report on the operation." "Sir, rescue operation successful. All 23 crew members recovered without injury. Electronic systems functioned within acceptable parameters despite GPS signal degradation. Senior Chief Williams's seamanship was—" Torres paused, searching for words adequate to describe what he had witnessed. "Sir, it was everything you said it would be and more. I learned more about navigation, seamanship, and naval operations in 6 hours than I did in 4 years of technical training." Mitchell nodded with the satisfaction of a commander who had seen another young sailor transformed by the reality of naval service. "And what else did you learn, Torres?" Torres looked out at the storm-tossed seas, then back at his commanding officer, his voice carrying a humility and understanding that had been completely absent from his earlier arrogance. "Sir, I learned that intelligence without experience is just theory. I learned that respect isn't given because of education or technical knowledge. It's earned through competence under pressure and the courage to serve others. I learned that I have much more to learn before I'm qualified to question the judgment of officers like you or experienced sailors like Senior Chief Williams." "Anything else?" "Yes, sir. I learned that the Navy isn't about individual brilliance or technological superiority. It's about trusting your shipmates, respecting the experience of those who came before you, and dedicating yourself to serving something much bigger than your own ambitions or ego." Commander Mitchell extended his hand with the gesture of an officer welcoming a new member into the brotherhood of sailors who had proven themselves under fire. "Welcome to the real United States Navy, Torres. Now you're ready to become not just a technician, but a sailor." The transformation of Marcus Torres became legendary throughout the Pacific Fleet within weeks of the Pacific Star rescue. Word spread through the informal communication networks that connect naval bases, ships, and training facilities about the young electronics technician who had challenged Commander Mitchell's authority and been transformed from an arrogant academic into a dedicated sailor through the crucible of an actual rescue operation. Torres threw himself into learning traditional navigation, seamanship, and naval history with the same intensity he had once devoted to computer systems and electronic troubleshooting. He sought out experienced petty officers and chiefs, asking questions about their operational experiences and learning from the stories that contained decades of accumulated wisdom about naval service. The young sailor who had once dismissed old-school naval methods as obsolete now understood that these traditions represented centuries of accumulated knowledge, paid for with the lives of sailors who had faced the sea's challenges and learned lessons that could not be taught in any classroom or computer simulation. Senior Chief Williams became Torres's mentor in seamanship and naval tradition, teaching him to read weather patterns, understand how boats behaved in different sea conditions, and develop the kind of intuitive understanding of maritime operations that could only come through extensive practice and experience. "Son," Williams told him during one of their training sessions, "the ocean is the greatest teacher you'll ever have. It doesn't care about your degree, your rank, or your theories. It will test everything you think you know and teach you humility faster than any drill instructor ever could." 6 months after the Pacific Star rescue, when the USS Valiant received orders for a challenging deployment to the South China Sea, Torres was selected as the lead electronics technician for a complex joint operation with Allied navies. His combination of technical expertise and newfound respect for naval tradition made him invaluable in coordinating sophisticated multi-ship communications during demanding exercises that tested the limits of both technology and seamanship. The deployment included operations with Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force vessels, Australian Navy frigates, and British Royal Navy destroyers in exercises that required precise coordination between ships using different communication systems and operational procedures. Torres's role involved not just maintaining electronic systems, but serving as a bridge between the high-tech capabilities of modern naval vessels and the traditional seamanship skills that remained essential for safe and effective operations. During a particularly challenging night exercise in rough seas, when GPS signals were jammed as part of the training scenario and ships had to rely on traditional navigation methods, Torres found himself serving as the primary navigator for the USS Valiant's participation in a complex formation maneuver. "Torres, we need backup navigation solutions. Electronic systems are compromised," Commander Mitchell ordered from the bridge. "Aye, sir." "Switching to celestial navigation and radar triangulation," Torres responded, using skills that Senior Chief Williams had taught him during countless hours of training. As Torres worked with traditional navigation tools, sextant, compass, and radar, to maintain the ship's position in a formation of 12 vessels, he felt a deep connection to generations of sailors who had navigated by stars, compass bearings, and the kind of seamanship that connected humans to the sea in ways that computers never could. The successful completion of the exercise, with all ships maintaining precise formation despite the electronic warfare simulation, earned recognition from the task force commander and demonstrated the value of combining modern technology with traditional naval skills. The night before the deployment ended, Commander Mitchell called Torres to his cabin for a private conversation. The captain's quarters aboard the USS Valiant reflected Mitchell's long naval career, with photographs from various commands, commendations for exceptional service, and books on naval history and leadership that showed his commitment to continuous learning. "Petty Officer Torres, I have something for you," Mitchell said, handing Torres a leather-bound notebook filled with navigation techniques, weather analysis methods, and operational lessons learned from decades of naval service. Torres opened the notebook and found pages covered with handwritten notes, diagrams, and observations that represented a lifetime of learning from every mentor, every operation, and every challenge that Mitchell had encountered during his distinguished career. "Sir, I can't accept this. This represents years of your experience and knowledge." "You can and you will accept it, Torres. That notebook contains wisdom from every sailor I ever learned from, every mentor who taught me something important, and every operation that added to my understanding of what it means to serve in the Navy." Mitchell gestured toward the notebook with the reverence of someone who understood the value of accumulated wisdom. Now it's your responsibility to add to that knowledge, learn from your own experiences, and eventually pass it on to the next generation of sailors who will follow the same path you've traveled. Torres read the inscription on the first page. To Marcus Torres, intelligence guided by experience creates wisdom. Use this knowledge to serve your shipmates and your country with honor. The sea is our teacher, tradition is our guide, and service is our purpose. Thank you, Commander. I promise I won't let you down. Mitchell smiled with the satisfaction of a leader who had successfully mentored another young sailor. Son, you already haven't let me down. You learned the most important lesson any sailor can learn, that we're all part of something infinitely bigger than ourselves. That understanding is what makes someone worthy of leading others. 2 years after the Pacific Star rescue, Torres was promoted to Petty Officer First Class and selected for the Navy's most prestigious technical training program at the Naval Postgraduate School. In his promotion ceremony, held on the USS Valiant's flight deck with the entire crew in attendance, he specifically requested that Commander Mitchell present his new rank insignia. "Commander," Torres said as Mitchell pinned the new chevrons on his uniform, "I need to make a confession. I planned that confrontation in the briefing room 2 years ago. I thought I could embarrass you and advance my career by demonstrating my superior education and technical knowledge." Mitchell chuckled with the warmth of an officer who had seen enough young sailors mature into leaders to understand the journey that Torres had completed. "I know, Torres. It was obvious from the way you had prepared your arguments and your complete confidence in your computer analysis. The question now is, what did you learn from that experience?" "I learned that real leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room or having the most advanced technology. It's about making everyone around you better, learning from those who came before you, and serving something greater than your own ambitions." Torres looked out at the junior sailors attending the ceremony, young men and women who reminded him of his own early arrogance and enthusiasm for proving himself through individual achievement rather than team contribution. "I learned that you could have destroyed my career that day with a single word to the right people, but instead you gave me the chance to grow into the sailor I needed to become. You taught me that the best leaders create more leaders, not followers." "And what kind of leader will you be, Petty Officer Torres?" Torres looked at the notebook that had become his constant companion, filled now with his own observations and lessons learned during 2 years of continuous learning under Mitchell's mentorship. "I'll be the kind of leader who remembers that every sailor has something to learn and something to teach. I'll respect experience while encouraging innovation. I'll understand that technology is a tool, but wisdom and character are what make the difference between success and failure." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And I'll never forget that our mission is always bigger than any individual ego. That the sea teaches humility to anyone willing to learn, and that the finest traditions of naval service are earned through competence, courage, and commitment to our shipmates." Mitchell nodded with the deep satisfaction of a commander who had successfully transformed a brilliant but arrogant young sailor into a leader worthy of the United States Navy. "Then my work here is done, and the Navy is better for having sailors like you." The story of Marcus Torres and Commander Mitchell spread throughout naval training facilities as an example of how great leaders handle challenges to their authority while creating opportunities for professional growth and character development. The Pacific Star rescue became required study material at the Naval Academy, analyzed not just for its tactical lessons, but for its demonstration of leadership under pressure and the transformation that occurs when arrogance meets wisdom. Years later, when Torres had advanced to Chief Petty Officer and was training his own teams of electronics technicians at the Naval Surface Warfare Center, he would begin each class with the story of that stormy November morning when a wise commander taught him the difference between being smart and being wise. "Intelligence," Torres would tell his students, "is knowing that a computer can calculate optimal approach vectors and provide precise navigation data. Wisdom is understanding that the ocean doesn't care about your calculations, that equipment will fail when you need it most, and that the lives of your shipmates depend on your ability to adapt, improvise, and rely on the accumulated knowledge of generations of sailors who faced similar challenges. He would show them the leather notebook that had become his most treasured possession, filled now with decades of accumulated wisdom from his own experiences and the mentorship of sailors like Senior Chief Williams and Commander Mitchell. The sea will test every assumption you have about your own capabilities and teach you humility faster than any instructor ever could. That's why we study the lessons of those who came before us, not because tradition is sacred, but because it represents the accumulated wisdom of sailors who survived challenges we can't even imagine. The transformation of Marcus Torres from arrogant engineer to respected leader became one of the most powerful examples of how the Navy's culture of mentorship and accountability creates better sailors and better people. His story proved that intelligence without humility is dangerous, but intelligence guided by experience and respect for others becomes the kind of wisdom that saves lives and builds character. Commander Mitchell continued to serve with distinction, eventually advancing to captain and commanding a destroyer squadron in the Pacific Fleet. But throughout his career, he always considered his greatest achievement to be the sailors he mentored, young men and women who learned that true strength comes not from individual brilliance, but from service to something greater than themselves. The USS Valiant continued its missions across the Pacific, with each new crew learning the story of the Pacific Star Rescue and the lesson it taught about leadership, respect, and the transformation that occurs when arrogance meets wisdom. The ship's culture became one of continuous learning, where questioning procedures was encouraged but disrespect was never tolerated, where innovation was valued but experience was revered. In a Navy where technology constantly evolves but the challenges of the sea remain eternal, the story of Commander Mitchell and Torres serves as a reminder that the most advanced equipment is useless without the wisdom to use it properly, that the brightest minds are worthless without the humility to learn from those who have faced the ocean's tests before them, and that true naval leadership is measured not by the brilliance of individual achievement, but by the ability to transform others into better sailors and better people. That November morning in the Pacific, with Hurricane Elena bearing down on a disabled cargo vessel and 23 lives hanging in the balance, became more than just a successful rescue operation. It became a defining moment that demonstrated how great naval leaders forge character in the crucible of real-world challenges, transforming raw talent into tested competence and personal arrogance into professional honor. It proved that the Navy's greatest strength lies not in its technology, its weapons, or its ships, but in its ability to develop sailors who understand that serving their country means serving something far greater than their own ambitions, their own knowledge, or their own desire for recognition. The lesson learned in those storm-tossed waters continues to echo through the halls of naval training facilities, in the wardrooms of ships around the world, and in the hearts of sailors who understand that the finest traditions of naval service are built on competence, courage, and the wisdom that comes from learning that some things are more important than being right.